In my van, I have a very fat manila folder that is bulging with correspondence from an inmate in Morgan County Correctional Complex here in Tennessee. A hellhole, if there ever was one. Not quite as bad as Truesdale, but nonetheless one in very, very bad condition, from which I get a bad report. His name is Grenda Harmer, and he has a long prison sentence. And what I appreciate about Grenda Harmer is that he thinks about the world kind of like I want you to think about the world around you, my listener, as you create prosperity and service to others, hopefully in a kind of a godly perspective. But you are trying to prosper, and also sometimes fending off claims against you and falsehoods made about your obligations to the good people, right? The good people in Washington. Maybe there are good people here in the county whom you are fighting off, making claims about you. And the question that Grenda Harmer deals with often is, what is your authority? And this is a question that he asks of officials, of wardens, of commissioners, and has a busy correspondence with me and also with them, and then also with a woman named Sharon Rondeau. She is the editor of thepostemail.com. That's the Post, and email is the name of her news website is thepostemail.com. She lives in Canterbury, Connecticut, a farming town of about 3,000 people, and has been putting the Post email out for about 9 years as a labor of love. And for the past 3.5 years, has been specializing in one area. Not that you'd say, how could she possibly be caring about Tennessee? But she does, because she has had correspondence with 200 Tennessee prison inmates in the past 3.5 years, and Grenda Harmer is simply one of them. So Sharon, tell my listener just briefly, just sketch out who Grenda Harmer is, and kind of what, and then you can bring us up to speed on the news from him. Sharon.
Okay, sure. And again, David, thank you for having me on. Again, it's always a pleasure to be on your show. Grenda Harmer is a longtime prisoner of the Tennessee Department of Correction, TDOC. Right now, as you said, he is at MCCX, the Morgan County Correctional Complex. He is in Unit 1, which is PC, or Protective Custody. And there have been a lot of difficulties there. A lot of times people don't realize that protective custody is not a punishment for the person placed there. It's intended for that person to be kept safe from whether it's gang members or other people who have made threats on his life or person or belongings or what have you. So people in Unit 1 there in protective custody are there supposedly for their own safety. While he's been there, he's noticed many irregularities and things that he claims are a violation of, as you said, the American Correctional Standards, American Correctional Association standards, and also TDOC policy and procedure, which are published online, by the way, and also Tennessee statutes, which always start with the TCA, Tennessee Code Annotated, and he always cites the law. There are many things he's noticed. Right now, there are two issues that I would say are paramount. One is an issue of improper food service that he alleges, and that's been at the Post email for weeks and even months, really. This problem seems to have escalated. He says that inmates without any clearance to serve food, no hairnets, not dressed properly, no aprons, and they're mopping floors and they're doing all these things while food is being served, completely against regulations. He has written to the Department of Public Health, the Tennessee Department of Public Health, several times, and he's copied me in on those letters, as I think he's copied you. And he's quite concerned that something is getting into the food. He says he's found foreign objects on his trays, and he's reported this and handed it over to people, brought their attention to it. And he even got a letter. He got a note back from someone at the health department who came and visited. And she said, she said to him verbally, "You are correct. These things should not be happening. This is his report. This is, what he reports." And then after he filed a grievance, it took several months to get a note back. But finally, he did get a note from the prison staff that said only qualified and cleared people will be serving food. And that seemed to be in keeping with what the health department inspector had said. Her name is in the article. In fact, I released one, I believe, 2 days ago on Monday. So that is a problem. But he said they really still haven't changed. He said they the order went out that only qualified people would serve food, but now they're right back to having people do cleaning and mopping floors and things like that while food is being served, and that the people serving it are not trained in food service.
Is that because there are too many prisoners there and there's no room for the food to be prepared in a kind of a segregated area, Sharon Rondeau?
Yes. There was a change made, and I can't recall when. It was over a year ago, because he's been in PC for over a year now. But there was a kitchenette that was apparently cleared legally and health department-wise to prepare food, and that was made into a cell, he tells me. He's reported that in many, many letters. And apparently that kitchenette, because it's no longer there, I don't know how they do this, but they're preparing the food somewhere, maybe even the main kitchen in the main part of the prison, and having it brought in, but it's being brought in by people who are not trained to do food service. And according to him, this is all according to him. I have not seen it for myself, but he did say that a woman from the health department, who he named, agreed that these things should not be happening, that it is against health policy, and that a change needed to be made.
Well, what's another highlighted area in Grenda Harmer's correspondence with you and perhaps Commissioner Tony Parker or the Morgan County Warden Mike Parrish?
Yeah, there have been many on many topics. A big paramount thing for him is safety. He says the safety and security of Unit 1 is always at risk. He claims that the correction officers leave the doors open so that people can come and go. And now the whole point of protective custody is that so people will not be just coming and going at will. It's not general population or GP, as they say. So he said that people are coming in and leaving. He does report that gang members from other places in the prison are coming in. And about a week or so ago, I received a letter wherein he wrote that a gang member assaulted a disabled prisoner, an older man with glasses, and he said he slapped the man's face. I think that was the report. It's in the paper, and I always publish the letter so people don't have to take my word for it. The letter that Mr. Harmer wrote is right out there. The date is on there, so people can see it. So he says security is a very, very big problem. He has also said that because of the lack security, or rather, put it this way, the lack security may be a result of bribery and things like that going on between gang members and some of the guards. He says some of the guards take bribes from the gang members in the form of food. So it goes back to food and food service. So he feels those things are connected. And he's very, very concerned about everyone's safety and security, including the man who was punched.
And also his own, he was telling me in a letter June 30, Sharon Rondeau, that he says they put a homemade knife in my cell made from a toothbrush and said it was mine. So this is called a shiv or a shank, a prison knife. He says they did it to ensure that I can't go to a transition center or an annex at another facility. So they're keeping him in protective custody. Somebody's arranging to have this done. And why? Try to explain or suggest what could be happening in the background to make this knife appear and Grenda become accused of that. The accuser is now the accused.
Yes, exactly. Yes, and he did write to me about that as well. That's a very good point. It was about 6 weeks ago that I first started hearing about this, and he sent me 2 or 3 letters on that topic. Before that, he had reported a possible attempt at some kind of harassment, whether sexual or otherwise, because I don't know if you heard this from him, but he had said that after the late night head count was done, I think he said it's around 9 o'clock or something, and then they all turn in early because they get up early. He said around 10:30 p.m. that local time, someone was coming in, opening his cell and supposedly doing a check to make sure he was there. But he said, I followed the rules. I made sure that my, neck and head and everything were showing above the blanket or the sheet. And so he said they really did not need to come in and shine a light in his eyes and things like that. So he reported that kind of what he called harassment then, or misconduct, or both. And then it was shortly thereafter, within possibly 2 or 3 weeks, he did report that they claimed, he said they did a shakedown. He called it a shakedown. He said, I've been the subject of a shakedown. My cell was torn apart. He says they claim I had a weapon. and he did specify a knife. And he said, "I've never had a weapon. He's never told me he's ever had a write-up for a weapon. And if he had a write-up, I don't think he'd be in that prison. I think he would be at Riverbend, maximum security or something like that. I don't think he'd be there, especially not in protective custody. So I don't believe he had a weapon, and I think it was a setup. And so he has to be very, very careful. He's aware of that. He said that. But he does feel that it is a hampering to his, first of all, getting out of protective custody, and second of all, perhaps going to a different facility. He supposedly has only 18 or 19 months left on his sentence. And once it's under 2 years, I understand they sort of start to look at where you can go to hopefully become transitioned back into society. And it might be a halfway house later or whatever, but they try to make preparations, and he doesn't feel that's happening in his case at all.
Well, in July 30, Sharon Rondeau, Grenda Harmer tells about the confinement. He's in his tiny cell, and he cites a rule from the American Correctional Association that says when confinement exceeds 10 hours per day, there are at least 80 square feet of total space per occupant. But then he says, well, there are more people. The space is smaller than that, and there are more people in a cell. And he says, you are keeping us confined to our cells in violation of ACA. And then he gives the number. There is no legitimate security or penological objective that justifies keeping PC protective custody. Unit number 1 offenders locked in our cells 22 hours per day based on the following. And then he cites 4 reasons from the rules, mostly from the rules that say that you can't keep us in this punitive situation, Sharon Rondeau.
Yes, very good point. And I believe he sent me the same letter or something very similar. In fact, in yesterday's mail, I received a letter from him that was a complete printout from the TDOC policies and procedures that reiterated the need, basically spelled out the need for protective custody. What is protective custody? Showing that it is not punitive. It's not going to segregation or what they sometimes call the hole. So the problem is that these particular prisoners, in this case it's all men, are in this unit, and they're treated as if they are being punished without the recreation, without the privileges that they would have. Even though he did report to me a few weeks ago that there had been some improvement. He said, we now have recreation 7 days a week, whereas before they did not. So he's very careful, I think, to point out any positive changes that happen, and I publish those as well. It's
right.
not all bad.
And
I want to give people a full picture of what's going on.
Right. Well, Nasa Taylor, the spokeswoman with whom we have both dealt in covering the prison system, makes a blanket statement that everything he says is a lie and it's sort of self-congratulatory, fiction. But that really is not the case. And as you're pointing out, when things get better, he says so. For example, when in this winter, the cell was cold and cold and cold, and finally, with his complaints, apparently, heat was properly piped to his unit or his room.
Yes, and I think Ms. Taylor at the time tried to make the case that, well, they can't just shut off the heat to one cell, or it wouldn't be that it just didn't go to one cell. But as it turned out, in a later letter, Mr. Harmer did say others were experiencing the same problem. They just didn't want to speak up. They just were afraid of the repercussions. So when it was restored to his cell, what he heard from others is, hey, my cell is a lot warmer now, too. I'm not sitting there freezing with 3 layers of clothing. So, and he did report that it was restored. And it wasn't even perfect. He says it's maybe works 80 to 85% of the time, but he says, I'll take this over what I had before.
We're talking with Sharon Rondeau. She's the editor and publisher of thepostemail.com. This is the website for the Tennessee prison system. She has dealt with more than 200 inmates in the past 3.5 years, and she's probably the journalist with the most knowledge from the inside, and often deals with administration. And again, it's thepostemail.com. If you're my listener, know someone with someone in the hell of state slavery in Tennessee, thepostemail.com will be a life strand for you. It's called The Post and Email by Sharon Rondeau. Now, let me ask about one method and one system that Grenda Harmer, the inmate whom we both really appreciate, uses, and that's called administrative notice. What is the whole idea behind administrative notice that he gives to these officials? And often these notices are simply restatements of law and rule and statute. or standards in the case of the ACA, the American Correctional Association. What is this program about?
A lot, and they are in the form of a formal memo, basically, with a subject line, to, from, date, of course, a subject, and he essentially will tell these officials, whether they're elected, appointed. Most of them are appointed, but of course your state representatives and all that, they're elected. We know that, and the governor. He will point out to them from the laws and the statutes and the policies and procedures to which he has access, which are many. He's been able to find access to these things, which is pretty amazing in and of itself. Your authority begins at, let's say, X and ends at Y, or it starts at A and it ends at B, and you are either not exercising proper authority based on the statute which gives you that. The statutes were passed by the people's elected representatives of the Tennessee General Assembly. We know how that works, and is signed by the governor and that kind of thing. But either the official, whether it's the governor himself or whether it is the prison warden or the Department of Health director or Tony Parker, who's the commissioner of the TDOC, he will say either you are abusing your authority by overstepping and imposing this draconian, for instance, the lack of recreation and being in cells 22 or 23 hours a day, when that's not what PC is all about. He will point that out, and he'll say, this statute says that this, and he'll spell it out, this is your job. But your job is not to or to allow unsafe conditions to descend upon us such that we are now at risk of anybody just walking in and punching us or bringing a knife into the cell, which happened to him. That's what got him into protective custody. So he will spell out the authority by Tennessee statutes, TCA, Tennessee Code Annotated. This is where you get your authority, but this is where you have overstepped your authority, or where someone else should have authority over that, and whose job it is to take care of that.
Well, Sharon, I'm trying to understand what you're saying. Explain how an administrative notice from Grenda Harmer, the prisoner, is different from just a letter of complaint. Is there a difference between the two documents? Because these notices don't really have any grievances in them themselves. They seem to be very bland, and they're not making a complaint about a particular fact base.
Right. It's more that he's pointing out where they're violating. A lot of times he will cite the oath of office. And correction officers do take an oath of office, as do wardens. They most likely work their way up, but they do take an oath of office. And he will say, you took this oath, and he'll put right there what it is. But here's where you are failing to adhere to that oath. And then he'll give some examples. As you said, it's not really a grievance because he's already gone through all of these specifics in grievance form, but it's more spelling out, here's how you are not doing your job for which the Tennessee taxpayers are paying you. And so he'll just spell it out. Here's where you fall short, or here's where there's an abuse of power, and this needs to change so that you're in line with the policy, procedure, statute, or correctional association mandate.
Well, what he's done to me, Sharon, is explain that he's making them personally liable for obedience. That's his goal, to make them personally responsible, because in a bureaucracy, no one's personally responsible. And there is this law, and there's this custom that we have, which are called policies, but no one has the policy or the statute or the rule pinned to him personally. And that's what he's doing. He's saying, look, Governor, look, Tony Parker, Commissioner, look, Mike Parrish, the warden here in Morgan County. This is the rule, and because you've been given this notice, you can't not obey the rule. That's his theory.
Right. That's a very good point. Yes, he is saying you have to follow it. You can't just take the oath and then kind of say or give the impression that you're following it. You must ensure that this is what happens, whether it's safety or food service or recreation or the condition of the cell, of the square footage, whatever it is. This is your job to make sure that this gets done. That's a very good point.
Well, and he has precedence for that in Worth County, Georgia. You may have read the story about the mass search of 700 students in a high school, Worth County High School, ordered by Jeff Hobby, the sheriff. Well, Hobby was indicted for, I think, several counts. 3 of them were violation of his oath, and he's going to be spending time in prison for these mass pat downs, which were there was effectively sexual abuse And about the same time that that was ruled on, there was a civil settlement that gave a $1,000 to $4,000 compensation payment for every student who was touched by a sheriff's deputy. And so the point I want to make, though, is about the oath of office. Grenda understands that the oath is very important, and there's a criminal claim against you, the official, Sharon Rondeau, if you don't obey the oath, especially when you've been notified of the oath itself in a particular context.
Right, exactly. It's kind of like when many of us, I'm not saying you or me specifically, but you write your congressman and you say, this is what you said you do, but you didn't do it. Or this is what the Constitution requires you to do, and you're not doing it. So, we do have these standards that are supposed to be adhered to.
This is David Toulis and Sharon Rondeau. Thank you so much for calling. Sharon, thank you very much for the interview. Appreciate it so much. This is David Toulis, and we're chatting with Sharon Rondeau, thepostemail.com.
Chattanooga Radio, Digital FM 95.3 HD4, 92.7 FM's news now.
Stephen Foster, the Democratic congressional candidate, is going to miss Election Day. He'll be in jail. TFP reports he's been sentenced to 6 months in jail and 6 months probation. In Dalton,